All right, welcome to our webinar series, Bad Surveys Can Sink Your Brand. This is one part of a total of 12-part series that touches on the potential pitfalls organizations can find themselves running into when they're developing their own customer surveys. Today's topic is specifically focused on question type and design. It's the final of this section of the webinar series that we're covering. Before we start, I do want to do an introductory recap. If you haven't had a chance to see our video tied to the introduction to this entire series, I recommend you go and watch it. But if you haven't, I'm going to cover it real quickly as a Clip Notes version before I start today's series. Our goal of the entire webinar 12-part series is really about enlightenment. We want to make sure people recognize the potential pitfalls they can encounter when they're developing their own customer surveys. But most importantly, we want to show organizations that there's a better way and that we have a solution to offer. So who is or what is CraniumTap? We're a marketing research firm that prides itself on balancing itself between the principles of understanding marketing and research and combining those together. It's all about being grounded, smart, and efficient and melding those worlds together. Hopefully that comes through in our series. Myself, my name's Adam Cook. I've been in the marketing research industry for over 20 years. I've been lucky enough to be afforded opportunities to get recognition at the national and international level. I have a number of published methods directly tied to the marketing research world, and I have a professional researcher certification. The climate today is obviously incredibly challenging in 2020 and likely moving beyond. And businesses are trying to find a new way forward, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. As a result, we are seeing organizations reach out to customers, which is a good thing. Getting insights is good, and we're seeing surveys go out left and right. But unfortunately, a lot of organizations are not aware of the potential pitfalls that they could be encountering and how that could hurt their brand. It could also bring them insights that are not to the maximum value that they'd like to get. That brings us to this entire, honestly, the webinar series in today's session. I'm going to be sharing examples that are real and used by other organizations. We've removed their names to just save face, but it is the unequivocal truth that we are going to be sharing. Some things might upset some people because they may have done them, fallen into these pitfalls themselves, but always remember it's not your fault, especially if you're in a do-it-yourself survey environment or even a marketing department. You may not have someone that has the number of years experience that we have in marketing research specifically, and even consultants sometimes. I mean, this is not necessarily their area of specific expertise, and it's not always their fault. But if you are working with a marketing research firm and you see them, integrating some of these pitfalls, shame on them. They should know better. But this is all about educating you all. The key to this entire series is understanding how to create a successful customer survey. And there are three key components to do that. One is creating a positive user experience. Two is making sure you get actionable insights. And three is making sure that all this has a positive impact on your brand. And contributors to that are anything from the invitation language itself or just general language you're using throughout, the survey design, question language, question types and design, and even the analytical approaches can have an impact on all three of these factors for creating a successful customer survey. All three of these work together though. So a positive user experience is going to give you more actionable insights, and a positive user experience is also going to produce a better brand experience and an identity that you want to continue to build on with your customer set. But having positive insights is obviously going to have a positive impact on your brand as well. They all work together for creating a successful outcome when it comes to your customer surveys. So let's get to it. We're going to cover the last portion of our question type and design section and tips that we have to offer. Tip number 59, when it comes to any survey platform you may be using, you may be tempted to use the latest and the newest form of design and something that seems elaborate. Just be careful, be aware that not the latest, greatest things may not produce the best experiences. While it may look cool and may look really forward thinking in design, it may not have a totally maximum impact on the customer experience. Let's look at an example. Here's a question that went out to business leaders specific to the COVID-19 crisis. And it's a simple multi-select question that we've all seen, but it's in a block format. And it's interesting and it looks cool because I'm able to see and it's clearly highlighted the blocks that I've selected in the multi-select question here. But the challenge is that a question designed like this can add to the scrolling experience. It is literally expanded the size of the question, and that's going to add time to the experience. It's also put it in this 2-column format in this instance, where all of a sudden there is an open-ended other bar a blank space for the other section below, and it's not necessarily at the bottom of the question, which could possibly create some confusion for the respondent. It's important you recognize those. This is an example of the solution maybe using some traditional format. You can see it makes it a more compact question. I can see the question itself. I won't necessarily have to scroll, especially on a mobile device when I see this. And the other option is always going to be at the bottom as well. Tip number 60, when it comes to income questions, just be sensitive about the ranges that you may be using. You don't want to slice and dice too small, and you want to make sure that you have an equal distribution of the ranges available. So what do I mean? Here's an example, a traditional one. This is directly from a nationally recognized research resource, and this is their breakout of income ranges. Now, the national average or the region we may have been looking at this example, the approximate average household income is $77,000. You can see here, below 77,000, the average for the market, there are 9 different ranges broken out. And then above the average is only 4. Now, it seems pretty specific and small what we're looking at, but that can have an impact on someone who's taking the survey and they have a lower income and they see these ranges. It looks like there's some isolation taking place, like they really want to hone in specifically on a specific income group, and that can have a negative impact on your brand. So the solution is simple in this instance. Make sure you have equal range representation on either side of the average. So if you're using the US, look at the average household income across the entire country or the specific region that you're measuring within, and then do your best to create ranges that have equal representation throughout. Tip number 61, it seems simple, but I see a lot of organizations just forget to include not sures or none of the above in questions. You need to make sure you have that option for people and not forcing them to select something that may not be the case. I've heard researchers talk about, well, we want to make them select something off of the list, but consumers in their minds, sometimes none of those options are something I want to select, and you need to give them that option. It's going to be more realistic when it comes to the analysis and more representative of what's real of your customer base. So what's an example? This was a question about preferred resources for getting information. There was a long list of different types of communications that they were listing here, and they didn't have a none of the above. And the realistic nature of this question, it's coming from a city in this instance, and they're asking for communications. I may not want any, and I'm just not given the option in this instance. You're going to want to include it. Tip number 62, if you're measuring customer sentiment, and when I say sentiment, that means anything that's tied to like feelings, what they value, what they agree with, what they believe in, what their perceptions are of things, how much they might be considering things, and a long list of other things. Do your best to use modern visual anchor scales to gauge that sentiment. Other question types can be inferior to that formula scale question. Now we have an entire video dedicated to this specific area. It's part 2 question types that we cover. If you get a chance, watch the video, but it really covers the entire range of different question types and how they can have a negative impact on the analysis. Whether it's a single selection question, I only pick one off the list, multi-select, rank, order, top 3, traditional Likert scales, That entire webinar series will walk through some of the impacts in terms of the consumer experience, in terms of the respondents, but also how that has an impact on your analysis. Tip number 63, make sure your questions are written for the environment in which they are intended. Our webinar series is strictly dedicated to the digital world of a survey. That's where surveys need to be moving toward, but we can spot when a survey has been written by someone that has worked in the telephone world on surveys in an instant, and it doesn't make sense in the digital world. Let's give you an example. Here's a question: what business-related issue are you most concerned with right now? Please use a 1 to 5 scale where 1 means least concerned and 5 means most concerned. One, I do need to point out, you're gonna wanna look at questions, if you have a scale question, look at the question without the scale itself. So the question is, what business-related issue are you most concerned with right now? That alludes to the idea that this question is gonna be a list, and I'm gonna pick one or maybe a few things that are the most. It could be a single select question or a multi-select question. It doesn't indicate that it's going to be a scale without talking about scales. So it's already slightly counterintuitive when I'm reading the question. But really what we want to focus on here is you didn't need that language of please use a 1 to 5 scale. Well, honestly, in this instance, they did need it because it didn't sound like a scale question. But if it's an effectively written scale question, you don't have to write out what the scale is going to be because they're going to see it. So what do we mean? Let's look at the solution. How concerned are you with the following COVID-19 business-related issues? And then you can have a list of options listed below, and you just have the scales. Notice in this instance, we don't have to describe what the scale is. Describing the scale is the telephone world. I have to describe it to someone so they know what the scale is. I can see it. If it's a visual component in the digital world, I can see it. I don't need a description. Tip 64, make sure the question instructions are displayed, one, consistently, but don't include them in the question. It should be separate from the question itself. Let's look at an example. Please explain how has your supply chain been disrupted due to COVID-19, and then select all that apply. It's melded right in there with the question. You don't need to do that. It's not a part of the question. It's almost like a sub headline. It should be downplayed as an option. So here's our solution. You just focus on the question, and then you break out the select all that apply. It can be in a lower font or something that's not bolded. It's just not necessary to include with the question. Tip 65, if you are in a position where you can't use a visual sliding anchor scale and you have to use radial points, at the very least, don't use descriptions for each point. And here's an example of one of those scales. You can see it says extremely important, very important, moderately important, slightly important, not at all important. That's a lot of wording, number one. And then this was just one section out of a long list that was used. A couple of problems with having individual descriptions for each point is, one, those descriptions are subjective to each individual respondent. And that subjectivity can be unevenly distributed amongst hundreds, if not thousands, of different respondents. Very means something to one person and slightly means something different to someone else. And those misinterpretations or different interpretations can have an impact on your results. So you're going to want to minimize the amount of content that you're using in descriptions of scales. So what's a solution? We'll show you what it looks like on a sliding scale. But even if you're using a radial point, you could still use just two ends of the scale, one being not at all important and the other end being extremely important. All other descriptions are null and void. We don't need those in the middle. Tip number 66. Now, you already heard me touch on making sure that you include not sure's and not, none of the aboves when you're looking at questions. If it's an option that's available, make sure it's there. If you're asking questions that are tied to what industry of employment that you're in, don't forget, not everyone's employed. Things change rapidly, and you're going to want to make sure that's included in the survey. Let's show you what an example looks like. So here was a question: what industry best describes your business? When this was sent out, it's assumed that everyone was employed. You got to make sure, again, things change rapidly, lists can change, the database, things can change. Make sure you have those options included in terms of, I could now be unemployed, moved into a homemaker type position, all of a sudden I drop out and become a full-time student, things like that. Make sure those options are included. This question was then followed up with a question specific to what captures their title. This could have been avoided if they had those other options. Then it skips past the follow-up question. But if I'm retired when I get this question, I might click other, and then it's prompting me with a question of what describes my title. It demonstrates some frustration and a bad user experience. It doesn't come off well with your brand. Tip number 67, assume people don't know brand names or sub-brand / service names. What do I mean by that? Let's show you an example. This was submitted from the city. You recently contacted the City of Springfield's Information Center, Springfield Residential Services, also known as the Impact Center. And then they asked some questions specific about that. The first question overall, how satisfied are you with your experience with Springfield Residential Services? This is operating on the assumption I even recognize that name. I may not know. I may have had one interaction. That brand name may not have stuck with me at all. I have no idea what this organization may be talking about. And then it's followed up with another question specifically tied to the residential name. So, you can see how something like this can be problematic. What's the solution? Describe it, present what the brand is first. Springfield Residential Services is a city-run division responsible for X, Y, and Z. And then you can follow up with a question, do you recall using any of their services? And then it's followed up with, the other question as well. This is your best opportunity. Again, don't assume that people know the specific brand name to different services or different lines of brands that you offer. You're going to want to make sure that there are different descriptions available within the survey itself to give it context for the respondent. That concludes our section specifically tied to question types and design. If you have a chance and you're interested, we also have a number of videos tied to other areas in invitation and general language, survey design, question types. We'll also have videos tied to analytical approaches specific to this series. But we're also going to be in the future creating videos tied specifically to other research topics, whether it's about consumer sentiment, persona development or approaches, and then different analytical techniques, whether it's tied to geographic analyses or gap analyses or quadrant type approaches. We're also going to get into communications testing, generational targeting, and again, a long list of other things that are tied to the marketing research world. Also keep in mind when we do develop these, it is based on a data-centric world. We ourselves create data-driven approaches that have been peer-reviewed and published, and we do our best to make sure that when we're making recommendations, it's rooted in data. If you have any questions or need any help, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find our contact information on CraniumTap.com for myself and the project manager, or you can directly email us at insights@CraniumTap.com. If you already have a representative to either one of our parent organizations, don't hesitate to reach out to them either.